Sunday dinners at the Whitaker estate were never about food. They were about power plays, dressed as polite conversation. As I swirled my wine, I listened to my brother Brandon, boasting about finalizing the deal that would secure the Whitaker legacy. Dad raised his glass proudly. Everyone clapped, everyone but me, because what no one at that table knew was that the deal Brandon was bragging about had been orchestrated by me. Not as part of the family company, but as CEO of a digital tech firm they all had once mocked. They still thought my company Velocity Nexus was just some online hobby, a blog, a few YouTube tutorials, a thing I did in my spare time from the guest bedroom of a rented apartment. What they didn't know, that guest bedroom was a secure data node hub, that my startup blog had grown into a global tech operation with 6,000 employees, cybersecurity contracts with state agencies and partnerships with Fortune 500 giants. While they laughed, I built. So when Brandon started bragging about acquiring a small competitor called Atlas Tech, I nearly laughed into my wine glass. Atlas Tech was my decoy company, a Trojan horse. Tomorrow they'd learn the truth Velocity Nexus owns Whitaker Logistics, and me, Elise Whitmore, the girl they dismissed at every dinner, was now their new boss. The next morning felt like standing at the edge of a cliff-calm, air-bright sun and the quiet before a seismic shift. The Whitaker name had been etched into the logistics world for generations, but by 9:00 a.m., that legacy would belong to someone else, me. I walked into the Whitaker Logistics headquarters in downtown Seattle limestone steel and ego. The boardroom on the top floor was filled with tension. Directors whispered. My father paced. My brother Brandon stared at spreadsheets like he could stop the inevitable by sheer will. Amanda, my assistant, handed me the final documents. They're rattled. She whispered, her tone calm, steady. They still think Atlas Tech is the buyer. Good. Let them, because Atlas Tech didn't exist. It was a shell company I created 3 years ago from a rented co-working desk in Capitol Hill, named after my cat. I used it to siphon off contracts, expose every weakness Whitaker Logistics had, and send their board into a controlled panic. What looked like sabotage was actually strategy. It was the beginning of the buyout they never saw coming. As I stepped into the room, chairs scraped. My father froze. Brandon's jaw dropped. Elise, what are you doing here? I set my tablet down and smiled. I'm exactly where I belong. Amanda spoke clearly, handing out folders to every board member. Allow me to formally introduce Elise Whitmore, CEO and founder of Velocity Nexus, the company acquiring Whitaker Logistics. Dead silence. Brandon's voice cracked first. You run a tech blog. No, I replied, cool and measured. I run a multi-billion-dollar digital infrastructure firm. We protect state agencies from cyber threats. We power back-end systems for global commerce. And now we're modernizing the logistics empire that refused to evolve. I tapped the screen at the head of the table. The monitors came alive. Revenue charts, international partnerships, employee numbers, market dominance. Velocity Nexus, $12.7 billion annual revenue operations in 28 countries, clients in public and private sectors. Whitaker Logistics was worth a quarter of that and sinking. Why the secrecy? My father asked, voice low. Because when I told you I had vision, you laughed, I answered. When I suggested modernizing the company, you called it unnecessary. So I stopped explaining and started building. I slid the acquisition contract across the table. These are the terms. They're non-negotiable. You can take your buyout or stay on and learn. But either way, Whitaker Logistics will be absorbed and reborn under Velocity Nexus. My father looked down, pride collapsing into silence. Brandon shook his head, his Harvard MBA and VP title meaningless now. The room slowly filled with acceptance. Board members nodded. A few even congratulated me. Amanda leaned over and whispered tech media's calling it the merger of the year. Nexus stock just jumped 9%. As the last signature dried, my father asked one final question, not as a CEO, but as a dad. Why didn't you tell us I met his eyes and said the words I had carried for years? Because you never listened. So I let the results speak instead. That night, I sat in my Manhattan penthouse office, floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the city. Notifications pinged, emails from investors, congratulations from clients, and a single text from my brother. You really did it. I was wrong. Teach me, I smiled softly. The girl they mocked over salmon and wine at Sunday dinners, she now owned the company they thought would outlive her dreams. Because sometimes the future doesn't come from legacy or loud ambition. It comes from being underestimated and building anyway. Sunday dinners in the Whitmore household were never just meals. They were showcases, comparisons, and subtle power plays dressed in linen napkins and red wine. Last night's dinner was no different. Brandon, my older brother, sat at the head of the table already basking in his self-appointed victory lap. He had no idea what was coming. So Elise, he began with that trademark smirk, still running your little online blog empire. He said it like a punchline, not a question. I smiled without blinking. Still running it, I replied smoothly, hiding the alert that had just popped up on my phone from Amanda, my assistant. The Velocity Nexus Whitmore Logistics merger had closed. Dad barely looked up from his steak. Brandon just finalized a massive acquisition. Real business. Not those internet side hustles. Right. Real business. The same real business that had been hemorrhaging clients ever since I began quietly dismantling it from the inside. They didn't know the buyout they were celebrating wasn't a rescue, it was a takeover. And I was the one holding the pen. Brandon chuckled, sipping his Cabernet. Anyway, we just bought out some annoying digital firm, Atlas Tech. You probably haven't heard of it. Way over your head. I nearly choked on my water. Atlas Tech. That was me. A shell company I built 3 years ago, under the radar, strategically positioned to infiltrate and undercut Whitmore Logistics until the board begged for relief. That relief, my real company, Velocity Nexus. No one at the table realized that the very competition Brandon thought he had conquered was orchestrated by his own sister from a brownstone office they once mocked as a spare room. The same space that now housed encrypted servers, a full cyber ops staff, and partnerships with more Fortune 500 firms than Whitmore had ever touched. I'm actually flying to New York tomorrow, I said casually, scrolling through the next update from Amanda. Big meeting. Some merger chatter, too. Brandon snorted. A YouTube brand deal is not a merger, Elise. I smiled politely. No, you're right. It's something much, much bigger. My father chimed in, completely missing the undertones. Elise, you should really consider joining the family business. There's a marketing position opening up soon. You've always been good with messaging. I bit my tongue so hard it hurt. Messaging. Like the 32-page cybersecurity proposal I'd once given him that he called too techy. Or the cloud migration strategy I drafted that he handed off to an intern. Thanks, Dad. I'll think about it. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was nervous, because I was ready. By the next morning, the news broke. Velocity Nexus had fully acquired Whitmore Logistics. The stock plummeted. A scheduled restructure became a full-scale leadership replacement. Brandon's name was nowhere near the new org chart. And me, I walked into that boardroom in a tailored navy suit, Amanda at my side, tablet in hand. Faces turned pale. Brandon stuttered. Dad slumped in his chair. Elise, he asked, eyes wide. What is this? I smiled, stepping forward. This, I said clearly, is the future. The one I tried to offer you. The one you laughed at. as the new CEO of Whitmore Logistics, now a Velocity Nexus company. I sat at the head of the table exactly where they never thought I belonged, but I didn't need their permission. I had built my own empire, and I'd just bought theirs. The boardroom at Whitmore Logistics was colder than I remembered. Glass walls, walnut table, and a view that used to intimidate me now felt manageable. Amanda, my executive assistant, stood beside me with the calm precision of someone who had done this before, and we had just not in this building. Not in front of my father and brother. 10 years ago, they laughed at the idea of a digital transformation, called my cloud migration proposal a waste of time, and told me to stick to the marketing deck. Back then, I left quietly. Today, I returned as the CEO of the company buying them out. Nathan, my older brother, the golden boy with the corner office and the Harvard MBA, was mid-rant when I walked in. We've got to find out where the leak came from. He barked, flipping through charts. The stock's down 14%, and the merger with Atlas Tech isn't what it seemed. Something's wrong. He looked up and froze. Elise, he said, his voice cracking just slightly. I nodded once, walking straight to the head of the table. Good morning, I said, placing my briefcase on the polished oak. Let's begin. My father stood slowly. What are you doing here? This is an emergency executive meeting. I know, I replied, pulling out a thick folder. And I'm the one who called it. Amanda cleared her throat. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to formally introduce Elise Whitmore, founder and CEO of Velocity Nexus and majority shareholder of Whitmore Logistics as of 9:03 this morning. The room went still. No one blinked. The silence was deafening. Nathan turned pale. That's not possible, he stammered. Velocity Nexus is a startup. Velocity Nexus is a digital infrastructure and cybersecurity firm operating in 28 countries, Amanda interrupted, with government contracts and a $12.7 billion annual revenue. And as of today, it owns the controlling interest in this company. My father lowered himself into a chair like gravity had just changed. I offered to help years ago, I said, voice calm. You told me I was wasting my potential chasing algorithms and Instagram noise. So I stopped explaining and started executing. Nathan was visibly sweating now. But the Atlas deal, the shell companies, the acquisitions, that was you, I nodded. Every setback, every lost client, every delayed upgrade, that was us. Not to destroy you, to prepare you. For what my father croaked. For the future, I said. And we're already living in it. I slid the acquisition terms across the table. Non-negotiable, a fair valuation considering the firm's recent performance. Several board members glanced at the documents. Others just stared at me like they were finally seeing someone they'd overlooked for years. You're dismantling the family name, my father said softly. No, I replied. I'm preserving it. What I build next will carry our name further than you ever imagined. But it'll look different. It has to. One by one they signed. Nathan tried to argue, but the board had spoken. Pride didn't stand a chance against numbers, and the numbers were mine. That night, I sat in my Manhattan office, the real headquarters of Velocity Nexus, watching the skyline glow with quiet power. My phone lit up with messages from them, some angry, some stunned, some even apologetic. But I wasn't waiting for validation anymore. I'd spent too long letting their opinions shape my worth. Now I shape industries. And for the first time in my life, they weren't leading me. They were following. After all the contracts were signed and the legal teams had packed up their briefcases, I sat alone in the executive boardroom of what used to be my family's company, Whitmore Logistics. Just hours earlier, they had laughed at me over Sunday dinner. My brother Nathan made jabs about my side hustle. My father questioned my ambition. And my stepmother offered me a marketing job like it was a favor. Now they were all gone, or rather, still in the building, but no longer in charge. My father had been the last to leave the room. He didn't say anything, just looked at me for a long moment before walking out, shoulders a little lower than I'd ever seen them. And I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The silence was enough. I turned toward the window, the city skyline glowing gold as the sun dipped below the horizon. My reflection looked back at me, older, maybe, but stronger, no longer trying to earn a seat at their table. I owned the table now. Amanda, my assistant, came in with 2 cups of coffee. She handed me one and gave me that knowing look she'd perfected over the years. "You good?" she asked. "Better than I expected," I said with a soft laugh. They underestimated me for so long, I started to think they might be right. But today proved they never really knew who I was. She nodded. They still don't. But the rest of the world is starting to catch on. The buyout was already trending in tech circles. Headlines like Velocity Nexus, quietly acquires legacy firm, and young CEO reshapes logistics industry had begun popping up on LinkedIn and industry blogs. Some of the same people who had turned me down for early funding now wanted interviews and coffee meetings. They'd called me too niche, too ambitious, and not seasoned enough to lead a major firm. Funny how the tune changes once you write the check. Amanda checked her tablet. Stock's up 11% since the merger went public. Forbes is asking if you'll do a piece for their Women in Power issue. I smiled. Let them wait. The truth is, I wasn't looking for applause. I wasn't doing this to show off. I built Velocity Nexus because I believed in a better way to do business, one that didn't depend on legacy, but on vision. I built it in my guest bedroom. I scaled it from coffee shops and late-night Zooms. I made mistakes, took risks, and I never asked for permission. And while Nathan polished his resume and courted investors with Dad's name on his card, I built quietly, strategically. They thought success meant glass towers and boardroom speeches, but I had my eye on the back end on systems data people who knew how to execute without fanfare. And when Whitmore Logistics began to crumble under its own weight, I was there not to watch it fall, but to rebuild it properly. Now they'll answer to me, not out of revenge, but necessity, because the industry has changed, and they didn't. I took one final look around the room before shutting off the lights, not as a daughter seeking approval, but as a CEO who earned her seat. The legacy didn't die today. It evolved, and I was the one who brought it back to life. I always thought the hardest part of being underestimated was the silence, but it wasn't. It was the performance. Every Sunday dinner at the Whitmore estate was a perfectly choreographed act of passive judgment disguised as tradition. I played my part, the eccentric daughter with the little internet thing, as they loved to call it. But this Sunday, everything changed. The morning after the acquisition went public, I walked into the Whitmore Logistics boardroom, not as a guest, not as the family embarrassment, but as Elise Whitmore, CEO of Velocity Nexus, and the woman who now owned the company they once mocked me for not joining. The air was thick. My father, James Whitmore, stood at the head of the table with disbelief etched into every wrinkle of his face. My brother Nathan, pale and glassy-eyed, clutched a spreadsheet like it could save him. The rest of the board looked stunned, unsure whether to speak or wait for instructions. Amanda, my right hand and COO, stood beside me in silent confidence. I pulled up the presentation. The screen behind me lit up with numbers they couldn't deny. This, I said, pointing to a graph showing Velocity Nexus's digital infrastructure and global reach, is what I've been building for the last 9 years. No one moved. You didn't recognize it because it didn't look like your kind of success, I continued. It didn't wear a suit. It didn't come with handshakes at charity galas. It came from behind a screen from Code Data Strategy. But that online thing you used to mock, it just saved your company from irrelevance. Nathan finally spoke, voice shaking. You tricked us. I looked him square in the eyes. I gave you every chance to modernize. I offered you cloud-based solutions, predictive analytics, sustainable automation plans. You laughed at all of it. So I stopped pitching. I built my own. My father sat down slowly. This company was supposed to be your brother's legacy. It still can be, I replied. But first we have to fix what you broke. Amanda handed out the restructuring plans. Roles would shift. Departments would consolidate. Old habits would be dismantled. No more nepotism. No more family favors. From now on, performance would determine your position, not your last name. You can walk, I said clearly. Take your exit package and go. But if you understand this, we're doing it the right way now. My way. Silence followed. Then slowly, one by one, the board members nodded, not out of fear, but respect. By sunset, Nathan had signed the documents, agreeing to stay on in a junior advisory role, one where he would learn, not lead. My father, he quietly retired. My stepmother sent a text later that evening. We didn't know. We're proud of you. We just didn't see it. I didn't reply. Some things don't need answers. That night I returned to my penthouse, bought in cash, of course, and stood by the window overlooking Manhattan. Behind me, my monitors pulsed with data from Velocity Nexus's global systems, contracts from Tokyo, R&D reports from Berlin, a live stream of inventory analytics from Brazil. I wasn't a little sister playing startup anymore. I was the future they never saw coming, because power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's built quietly. Sometimes it looks like late nights, missed birthdays, and people assuming you failed until you show up and own the very company they tried to keep you out of. And the best part, I didn't need to raise my voice to make them listen. I built something louder than all their doubt-combined results. And now they have no choice but to follow my lead. As I stood in the very boardroom where I'd once been dismissed, the silence said more than any applause ever could. I was no longer just Elise with the online thing. I was Elise Whitmore, the CEO of Velocity Nexus, and the woman who now owned Whitmore Logistics. My brother's smirk had vanished. My father, the same man who used to call me the distracted one, sat speechless. And every single executive who once rolled their eyes at my ideas now leaned forward waiting for my lead. But I didn't gloat. I didn't scream. I just stood tall and told the truth. I hadn't set out to take revenge. I had built my own future, not to prove them wrong, but to prove to myself that I could do it my way. And that's the lesson. Sometimes the people closest to you won't see your vision, not because it isn't real, but because they're too stuck in their old definitions of success. So if you're out there building something in silence, being doubted, underestimated, or ignored, keep going. You don't need permission. You don't need validation. You just need courage. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been underestimated or mocked for dreaming big? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs the reminder that quiet success is still success, and it might just be the loudest kind of all.